Ever catch yourself thinking, if only I'd done that differently, everything would be okay? Like it's all your fault.
Oh, absolutely.
That nagging feeling, well, you're not alone.
That's so common.
In this deep dive, we're going deep on a common psychological trap: excessive internalization. And we're turning to the insights shared in Loosely Talking Psychology to help us unpack this whole thing. So get ready to figure out if you might be falling into these patterns and, more importantly, how to break free.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get stuck in that cycle of self-blame.
Totally.
And what we're really talking about here is this tendency to kind of take on responsibility that isn't even ours to take.
Right.
Like
No.
that inner voice just keeps saying, it's all my fault, even when logically you're like, hold on a sec.
Exactly. It's not totally true, but that guilt still creeps in.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going beyond just like taking responsibility for our own actions here, right? Because obviously owning up to our mistakes, that's important. But this sounds like it goes way beyond that into this whole other territory of self-blame.
Exactly. You've got it. It's all about finding that balance.
Yeah.
And Loosely Talking Psychology, they actually highlighted this really well. They contrasted excessive internalization with its polar opposite, projection.
Oh, interesting.
So, while some of us tend to blame ourselves for everything, others are out there deflecting responsibility completely, blaming everyone else to avoid any kind of introspection.
Right, right. Two sides of the same coin in a way.
And the article made a really good point. Both extremes ultimately lead to suffering.
It's about finding that middle ground, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
acknowledging our part without thinking we have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders.
Yeah.
And to really illustrate this, the article shared some seriously powerful examples. I think they'll resonate with a lot of our listeners.
Oh, for sure. One that really struck me was the story of the burdened son.
Ooh, tell me more about that one.
So picture this. Imagine carrying the weight of your parents' happiness from childhood. This young man, he grew up believing that if he was just good enough, if he was more obedient, less troublesome, that his mom's anxiety, her sadness, would just magically disappear.
Oh, wow. Talking about a heavy burden to carry, especially as a kid.
Right. And the really sad part is this pattern, it followed him into adulthood.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It affected his relationships, his work life, everything.
I can see how that would be the case.
He felt constantly responsible for other people's happiness, which, as you can imagine, led to anxiety, burnout, and this deeply ingrained belief that he wasn't good enough.
It really makes you think how these early experiences, especially within our families, can have such a ripple effect throughout our lives. It's like those patterns really stick with us.
Absolutely. And Loosely Talking Psychology even talked about how these patterns can be passed down through generations. They shared another example of a young family, a couple with a son, who were struggling with this exact thing.
Oh, wow. I'm curious to hear about that. What happened there?
So the wife, she was feeling incredibly frustrated. Her husband was an entrepreneur, constantly working, and she just felt like the entire weight of their family, the household, their son's well-being,
Yeah.
it all fell on her shoulders.
And their son, I imagine he was picking up on all this tension.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
He was absorbing it like a sponge.
Yeah.
Started internalizing the blame for his parents' arguments.
Oh, wow.
Think about it.
Yeah.
He's just a kid, right?
Yeah.
His little mind, it couldn't grasp the complexities of adult relationships, so he simplified it.
Right.
Boiled it down to, if I were a better kid, my parents wouldn't fight.
Oh, that just breaks my heart. It's like their emotional baggage became his burden to bear.
And that's the reality for a lot of kids, sadly.
Yeah.
They're so perceptive. They pick up on everything,
Mm-hmm.
but they just don't have the emotional maturity to understand that their parents' problems aren't their fault.
Right, right.
And you see it manifest in their well-being.
Mm.
This little guy, he became withdrawn. His school performance, it plummeted.
Oh,
It's a heartbreaking example of how this "it's all my fault" mentality, it can have a ripple effect,
Yeah.
impacts the whole family system.
absolutely. And hearing these stories, I'm sure some of our listeners are like, oh, wow, I recognize that. Maybe they see it in their own experiences or even, in their own children.
For sure. It's so easy to fall into those patterns,
Yeah.
especially for those of us who are, naturally empathetic, always wanting to help.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's dig into the why a bit more. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we fall into this guilt trap? What does Loosely Talking Psychology say about that?
Well, they highlighted two main reasons we fall into this excessive guilt trap.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. So hit us with reason number one. What is it?
All right, so the first one, they call it the need to cleanse others. It's this deep-seated desire we have to alleviate the suffering of the people we love.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we see our loved ones hurting, and our instinct is to jump in, fix it, take on their pain as our own.
It's like we're trying to be their emotional saviors, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like we can somehow absorb their pain and make everything okay.
Yeah.
And while that impulse comes from a good place, we
Yeah.
love these people, right?
Right.
But it can become a very slippery slope. We start believing that if we just love them enough, do enough, be enough, then their happiness becomes our responsibility.
Oh, I can see how that would happen, but that's a recipe for burnout, isn't it? Because we can't control other people's emotions or wave a magic wand and fix all their problems no matter how much we might want to.
You're preaching to the choir. It's impossible. And underneath that savior complex, you often find this underlying need to prove our own value in the relationship.
Oh, wow.
We start to equate our worth with our ability to fix, to heal, to make things better for the other person. Like our worthiness depends on their well-being, which is just not true.
Wow, that is such an important insight. So much to unpack there. And what about the second reason? This subconscious narcissism thing, it seems a little counterintuitive when we're talking about excessive guilt.
It does, right? Like guilt and narcissism, they seem like they'd be on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But it's way more nuanced than that. So excessive guilt, it can actually stem from this inflated sense of our own importance. Like we have this huge influence over situations and people.
So we're almost giving ourselves too much credit in a way.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
We overestimate our control over other people's lives and how things turn out for
I
them.
have that much power.
Right. We
Yeah.
tell ourselves, if only I had done X, then they wouldn't be feeling Y, or this is all my fault because I should have known better.
Oh, that if only spiral, that is a tough one to escape. I know I've been caught in that thought loop many times.
It's so easy to get trapped there. But the thing is, life is rarely that linear. It's not a simple cause and effect.
Right.
There are countless factors that contribute to any given situation. And that's something, loosely talking psychology, really drove home the importance of accepting that we are not the sole authors of other people's stories. We're not the only characters in their play.
We're not the directors of their movie.
Exactly.
We don't have that much control, really.
We don't, and that's a good thing.
It is. It's freeing, in a way.
It is.
Okay, so where do we go from here? How do we break free from this "it's all my fault" trap? I know our listeners are ready for some practical tips. What does the article suggest?
Well, it all starts with boundaries.
Boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries are key. That's like step number one, and honestly, probably the most important step.
Okay.
Setting clear boundaries for yourself.
Okay, so boundaries, it's such a simple word,
Right.
but it can be so hard to put into practice. So talk to me about boundaries in this context. What does that actually look like?
It means acknowledging, first and foremost, that you are not responsible for fixing everyone's problems.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you can't live their lives for them, as much as we might want to sometimes.
Right.
But it's about recognizing that wanting to protect your own emotional well-being, wanting to
Yeah.
set those boundaries, it doesn't make you a bad person.
It's so true. But it's tough. It's like we try to earn our worth by putting in all this emotional labor, especially with our loved ones, the people who are used to us always saying, yes, yes, yes. To set that boundary,
It's hard.
with them, it's so hard.
It is. It's a process for sure. It
Yeah.
takes time and practice. And honestly, those conversations, they can be uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
But it's crucial for us to be able to do that if we want to break free from this whole cycle of excessive guilt.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to what we were talking about before, with self-worth, right? Recognizing that our value isn't tied to our ability to fix everything for everyone.
Exactly. It's about disentangling those things,
Yeah.
Your worth is inherent. It's not about what you do for other people. And another tool that the article mentioned that I thought was really powerful was the power of apology.
Okay, that one seems a little counterintuitive. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So it might seem counterintuitive at first, right? But if after you sat with it, really reflected and you realize that, yeah, I do hold some responsibility here. Maybe I made a mistake or I hurt someone. Offering a genuine apology, like a true heartfelt apology, can be so freeing.
Okay.
It allows us to acknowledge our part,
Oh.
to express remorse, and then to actually begin to move forward.
It's about owning our part without again, carrying the weight of the whole world on our shoulders.
Yes, exactly. It's finding that balance, that sweet spot between taking accountability and having self-compassion.
Yeah, and it's about being vulnerable too. It's allowing ourselves to admit that we're not perfect.
So important.
And I love how loosely talking psychology, it gave us some real concrete tools for navigating these situations. And one that I really liked was the influence checklist.
Oh, yeah.
Such a good one.
Such a simple technique.
Yeah.
But it's so effective because it helps us look at things more objectively. So let's say, you're facing a challenge and that "it's all my fault" voice, it starts to creep in.
Like that example with the little boy whose grades were slipping.
Yes.
It would be so easy, especially as a parent who's already carrying so much, to think, this is my fault, I'm failing him.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Mom guilt is real.
Oh, yeah.
But instead of getting caught up in that guilt, the influence checklist says, hold on a second. It helps you hit pause and ask yourself, what are all the factors that are at play here?
Okay, so not just blaming the mom in this situation, but it's about acknowledging that, hey, maybe dad's work schedule is a factor, or the teacher's teaching style, or even the kid's own personality, how he learns best.
Yes, you got it. It's about taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. Because when we list out all the possible influences, we can start to see more clearly where responsibility actually lies.
Hmm.
It's not about diminishing our role.
Right.
It's about keeping us from taking on 100% of the blame, when the truth is, life is so much more complex than that.
It's about moving away from that all or nothing thinking, the black and white thinking, and embracing the gray areas, the nuances, recognizing that, hey, most of the time, nothing is ever entirely our fault.
You've got it. You've hit the nail on the head.
And that brings us to what I think is the most important takeaway from this whole deep dive.
What's that?
You are not alone. This tendency to over-internalize, to take on blame that doesn't belong to us, it's so incredibly common, but it doesn't have to define us.
It really doesn't. It's about giving ourselves permission to set down that burden.
Yeah, to unshoulder that weight that we've maybe been carrying for far too long.
And then to replace it with self-compassion.
Self-compassion, yeah.
To recognize that we're all just works in progress,
We are.
We're doing the best we can with what we have in each moment, and that's enough.
We're human.
Exactly.
We're not perfect.
Life is messy. Life is unpredictable. And sometimes things just don't go according to plan. And you know what? That's okay.
It's about embracing those imperfections, the setbacks, the failures even,
Yeah.
and seeing them not as proof that we're not good enough, but as opportunities to learn and grow.
Beautifully said. Could not agree more.
That's a really powerful note to end on, I think. Today, we explored this whole idea of excessive internalization, really understanding where it comes from. And we've hopefully given you some practical strategies for stepping out of that self-blame cycle. So as you go about your day, here's something to think about. If excessive internalization is one extreme, how can we make sure that we're taking appropriate responsibility for our actions without tipping over into that self-blame trap?
That's the question right there.
It's a balancing act for sure, but it's one that's worth mastering because it leads to a more fulfilling, joyful, and peaceful life.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.